Tony, NATO and the G7 have portrayed, Russia and China as a security threat. Are they a security threat? We haven't seen a lot of evidence on that on the ground, as Vladimir was noted. But we do know that NATO has invaded many countries, causing security issues there and the rise of terrorism. Unfortunately, the list of countries that NATO has invaded is too long, and I can't name them all.
Well, look, NATO has on its side the treacherous Western media who cover up all its crimes and exaggerate the threats from China and Russia. But yes, I mean, Vladimir is absolutely right about Biden. You know, he cannot even hold a press conference. He tried to hold one here at the G7 in the UK, and it was a farce. You can imagine all of his advisors tearing. What's he going to say now? Because he kept stumbling over himself, changing his mind about whether he wanted to answer questions, this sort of thing. He looks incompetent, and that's because I think Vladimir's right. He's given about 3 or 4 points by his advisors, and they say to him, stick to those, stick to those. The guy can't really think for himself. But the key at the heart of all of this, of course, as G7, we move on to the NATO conference going on now in Brussels, the summit, and then on to meeting Biden and Putin meeting. I believe it's in Geneva. So that process is a traditional one through the years when the NATO summit takes place. But one thing that many people are missing is that the Bilderberg conferences, which is the political lobby of the NATO countries, usually meets the weekend before the G7. So they are setting the agenda for the G7 and for the NATO conferences, being the political lobby for the NATO. But 2 years or last year, the Bilderberg conference didn't meet, and we're now supposed to have forgot that it ever existed, even though this organisation, which I've tracked for many years, has been meeting really since the 1950s, pretty much every year, and setting the agenda for these other meetings. So I think we've also got to look at the relationship between, the accusations being made in the media, unchallenged by journalists in the West, and what Biden's actually saying about cyber attacks, because the US government and the British armed forces the Pentagon have been identifying these cyber attacks very clearly, saying, well, the trouble with the cyber attack is you don't know where it's coming from. And yet they've changed their nuclear reaction policy, saying, well, if there is a cyber attack, we may react with nuclear weapons. Now, this puts them in a very strange position in that there may be an unknown cyber attack and they retaliate with nuclear weapons, even though they don't know where it's come from. So that's the farcical situation the military strategists in the West are in. Putin, however, as we've seen over the last few months, has actually ended diplomatic relations between Moscow and Washington by, first of all, withdrawing the ambassador and then politely asking the American ambassador to go home. He believes, I think, the Russian intelligence, the inside story, if you read between the lines here, is that the Russian intelligence believe that NATO and the Western politicians are up to no good this summer, possibly later this year, going to try a provocation of some kind, and by withdrawing ambassadors, ending those diplomatic. Actually, what Vladimir Putin is saying is, we're ready for you. Whatever you want to do, we're ready for you. So I think those are the sort of things that are going to be on the table when Biden meets Putin.
Vladimir, there's a school of thought that Biden, the NATO chief, and the likes, they're using some kind of scaremongering tactics for nations, to bring in. To sell weapons, for example, to nations, that there's this invincible enemy in your region, and not just in Europe, but across regions across the world. And nations will do that. Will buy weapons, for example, instead of using that money to invest in their domestic problems and domestic issues. Would you go along with that?
School of thought is absolutely correct. What NATO and the United States have in front of them is a changing world. We have, not just only Russia, we have China, we have India, And U.S. allies in Europe, for example, are very seriously concerned and interested. In fact, like the example of Nord Stream 2, they are interested in dealing directly with Russia, with China, and that would present a scandal to American hegemony. So they would try their best through thick and thin. They would amplify things which all countries do. All countries have criminals. All countries have cyber attacks. All countries, major countries, try to influence, elections. Just look at how many other countries, are involved with that. From Israel to Great Britain to anything. So, but they would use this opportunity, scaremonger, and convince Europeans, no, there are the big bad wolves out there, Russia and China, so you better stick like little children next to us, don't negotiate. We remember our original idea of having NATO is to keep Germany down and Russia out, and that's now I think add to that China. It's basically what they want to do is to keep Russia and China out and Germany down. So it doesn't change. But the thinking in Washington didn't change. But the reality is changing, and sooner or later they will have to face with it. This year they will, because they have a Biden who is not capable.
Pardon me, Vladimir, I've just got a minute left. I just want to bring Tony in for one final point, picking up from where you left off. Tony, I don't know if you heard what Vladimir said. Is this more to do with global dominance and imperialism?
Well, of course, that's the Western approach, is to actually, in fact, the United States has taken on the mantle that Nazi Germany had in the Second World War, in just simply invading countries, coming up with any old excuse to do it, and breaking international law almost every day of every month, and racing on itself to do it. A little bit of a slowdown of that with Trump, but there's no indication that this is going to finish. So Biden is accusing China and Russia of trying to split the NATO alliance. This is ridiculous, because actually it's the United States that's doing that by telling Germany that they're not allowed to sign deals with Russia about buying gas. The NATO alliance has been split by the Americans. And actually, I think you've got, between Putin and Biden, it's a fascinating conversation. I'd love to be a fly on the wall there, because I see a lot of similarities between the US empire and the Chinese empire, the atheist Chinese empire. Both of them are authoritarian in different ways. And I see Russia as a key sort of third force in the world, a very powerful nuclear force, but actually a stabilizing influence, as it has been in the Middle East, slowing down the balkanization, possibly even stopping the invasion and the takeover of Syria. And so that would be a fascinating place to be, to hear what Putin and Biden have to say. Although, of course, Biden, I don't think he's going to be the man in charge. I think his advisors are going to be telling him what to say, whereas Putin really is his own man.
But you're saying Biden can't finish a sentence, so how are they going to have a conversation?
Well, exactly. His advisors, I think, will be leading. Biden's advisors will be leading the conversation. But Putin, I think, is very much his own person, and he's the guy. If you're dealing with him, you're dealing with the Kremlin, you're dealing with Russia. You're not dealing with Russian gangsters, because Putin will not let the organized crime in Russia come anywhere near the Kremlin. He chops their hands off or gets them abroad or whatever, if they come near the Kremlin. So he has made sure that the gangsters don't tell the Russian government what to do, which I'm afraid the West has not.
Thanks, Tony. Let me thank our guests for their contribution and their thoughts and time. Vladimir Golsky, lecturer at Brown University from Rhode Island, and Tony Gosling, an investigative journalist from Bristol. And dear viewers, thank you for staying tuned to this edition of the News Review.